I learned the true measure of my worth on the morning of my sister's wedding, when my mother handed me a servant's apron and told me to arrange the tea service in the south parlor, not as a guest, as a convenience. The apron was starched linen, crisp and impersonal, the kind our housemaids wore beneath the stairs. My mother did not meet my eyes when she pressed it into my hands. She merely said, in that voice she reserved for directing the staff, that Lucinda's guests would expect refreshment after the ceremony, and Mrs. Bennett had taken ill, and I was to make myself useful for once. Then she turned away, her silk skirts whispering across the floorboards, leaving me alone in the dim hallway with that apron clutched in my fingers like evidence of a crime I had not yet committed. The morning light through the window was pale and diffident, the kind of light that reveals rather than flatters. I could see dust suspended in the air, could smell beeswax and hothouse roses, could hear the muted chaos of preparation filtering down from the upper floors where Lucinda was being transformed into a bride. Someone laughed. Someone else called for more pins. The house vibrated with the importance of her day, while I stood perfectly still in a corridor that suddenly felt narrower than it had moments before. I was 24 years old. I had lived in this house my entire life, and in that moment I understood with absolute clarity that I had never truly lived here at all. I had merely occupied space between my sister's light. The south parlor smelled of lilies and furniture polish when I entered, carrying the heavy silver tea service my grandmother had brought to this house as part of her dowry. My hands knew the weight of it. I had poured tea in this room 1,000 times, always as a daughter of the house, always as a participant in the small rituals of genteel life. Today, I would pour as something less. Today, I would be invisible by design rather than by accident. I set the service on the mahogany sideboard and began to arrange the cups. Bone china, hand-painted with delicate roses, each one perfect and identical. Like my sister and I were supposed to be. Like we had never been. Lucinda was beautiful. This had been established as fact from the moment of her birth, repeated so often it had acquired the weight of scripture. Golden hair that caught light like a benediction. Blue eyes that men wrote foolish poetry about. A laugh that sounded like music even when it was mocking you. She had received 17 proposals by her 22nd birthday. She had chosen Lord Ashworth, who was wealthy, entitled, and utterly conventional in his admiration of her perfection. I was intelligent. This had been mentioned occasionally in the same tone one might note that a horse had a steady gait or a dog showed loyalty. A useful quality, perhaps, but not one that inspired proposals or poetry. My hair was dark, my eyes were gray, and my laugh, on the rare occasions anyone heard it, was apparently too loud for a woman of breeding. I had received no proposals. I had not expected any. What I had expected, in the naive architecture of my younger self, was that intelligence might be its own form of currency, that observing, understanding, and remembering might make me valuable in some way my family would eventually recognize. I had kept my father's correspondence organized during his final illness. I had managed the household accounts when my mother's grief made her incapable. I had negotiated with tradesmen, dismissed dishonest servants, and ensured that the estate continued to function while everyone else performed the theater of mourning. My reward had been this apron. The guests began arriving as I finished arranging the lemon cakes. I could hear them in the entrance hall, their voices bright with anticipation and social calculation. The Havisham sisters, who had not spoken to me at the last assembly, Mrs. Pemberton, who had once suggested to my mother that I might make an excellent companion for her elderly mother, young Mr. Thornwood, who had courted Lucinda the previous season before she decided his fortune was insufficient. They swept past the parlor doorway in rustles of silk and murmured greetings, barely glancing inside. Why would they? I was arranging cakes. I was part of the furniture. Then the Duke of Rothwell entered the room. I did not look up immediately. I was measuring tea leaves into the pot with careful precision, counting each spoonful as I had been taught. But I felt his presence the way one feels a change in air pressure before a storm. The quality of silence shifted. The afternoon light seemed to concentrate itself. When I did look up, I found him watching me with an expression I could not immediately interpret. He was older than most of the other guests, perhaps 40, with silver threading through dark hair and lines around his eyes that suggested either frequent laughter or frequent displeasure. His coat was perfectly tailored, his bearing suggested absolute confidence, and his gaze was disturbingly direct. "Miss Ashworth," he said. "Miss Eleanor Ashworth," I corrected quietly, because I knew he had assumed I was my sister. Everyone always did. His expression shifted, subtle as a card turning in skilled hands. I see. Forgive me. You are the bride's sister. I am. And you are serving tea. There was no judgment in his voice, which somehow made the observation more cutting than criticism would have been. I felt heat rise to my face, but I kept my hand steady as I set down the tea tin. My mother thought it practical. Our housekeeper is unwell. How efficient. He moved closer, and I noticed he walked with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. And how thoroughly humiliating. I looked at him sharply then, searching his face for mockery. I found only calm assessment, the look of someone who recognized a truth when he saw it and saw no point in pretending otherwise. Your Grace, I said, carefully, I'm certain you have better places to be than observing the domestic arrangements of the Ashworth household. At the moment, I cannot think of a single one. He picked up one of the delicate teacups, examined it with apparent interest, then set it down again with deliberate care. Your grandmother's china, I believe. I remember it from your father's dinner parties, before his death. You knew my father? We served in Parliament together, briefly. He was a thoughtful man, principled. It was a loss when he passed. His eyes found mine again. I imagine it was a particular loss for you. Something in my chest constricted painfully. No one had said anything like that to me in the 2 years since my father's death. They had offered my mother condolences. They had assured Lucinda that her beauty would survive mourning. But no one had acknowledged that I, specifically, might have lost something that mattered. Yes, I managed. It was. The Duke nodded slowly, as if I had confirmed something he had suspected. Then he did something extraordinary. He picked up the second cup and saucer, poured tea for himself with practiced ease, and added 2 lumps of sugar without asking where they were. He had been observing. He had been paying attention. Your mother, he said conversationally, stirring his tea, has made a significant error in judgment today. I'm sure she's done the best she could under difficult circumstances, I replied automatically, the words emerging from years of trained loyalty. I'm sure she has done what was convenient. That is not the same thing. He took a sip of tea, his expression thoughtful. Tell me, Miss Eleanor, do you play chess? The question was so unexpected that I answered honestly. Yes, my father taught me. And do you play well? I have never lost a game to anyone in this house. Including your father? Including him, eventually. The Duke smiled then, and it transformed his entire face from austere to something almost warm. I thought as much. You have the eyes of someone who sees several moves ahead. He paused, his gaze holding mine. I wonder if you see what I see. And what is that, Your Grace? That this wedding is going to be a disaster for your sister, a triumph for your mother's social ambitions, and an absolute waste of your considerable intelligence. He set down his cup with a soft clink of china. Unless, of course, you are interested in a different sort of game entirely. My heart had begun beating faster, though I could not have said precisely why. I don't understand. I think you do. He gestured toward the doorway, where laughter and conversation filtered in from the ceremony preparations. I think you understand perfectly that you have been set aside, diminished, and rendered invisible by people who should have valued you. I think you understand that your sister is about to marry a man who admires her appearance and has never once asked her opinion on anything of substance, and I think you understand that your current situation is both intolerable and, with the right strategy, entirely reversible. I stared at him, my practiced composure cracking. Why are you saying these things to me? Because I have need of a wife who can think. He said it simply, as if discussing the weather. And because I have watched you for the past 20 minutes manage a humiliating situation with more grace and intelligence than most people display in triumph. Also because I'm 41 years old, I limp from an old riding accident, and I have no patience left for beautiful idiots who giggle. You cannot possibly be proposing marriage. Why not? You have no prospects. I have no heir. You are demonstrably intelligent and have been raised to manage an estate. I am wealthy, titled, and in need of someone who will not bore me at breakfast. He paused. Also, I believe the expression on your mother's face when I make the announcement would be extraordinarily satisfying. For both of us. I opened my mouth, closed it, tried to organize thoughts that were suddenly tumbling over each other like water over rocks. You don't know anything about me. I know you have managed your family's estate for 2 years while grieving your father's death and receiving no recognition for it. I know you are currently wearing a servant's apron because your mother values social convenience over your dignity. I know you poured tea for me with hands that did not shake, even though I could see fury in your eyes. I know that fury is focused outward, not inward, which suggests resilience rather than self-destruction. He tilted his head slightly. I also know that you have not yet told me I am insane or called for someone to remove me, which suggests you are considering the practical applications of my offer. He was right. God help me, he was right. I was considering it. Not because I loved him. I had known him for perhaps 15 minutes. Not because I craved a title. I had never particularly cared about such things. But because in that moment, standing in my grandmother's parlor in a servant's apron while my sister married a man who would never see past her face, I recognized an opportunity for something my father had taught me to value above all else: strategic positioning. What would you expect of me? I asked quietly. Competence, conversation, honesty, the management of my estates during my frequent absences in London, the production of an heir if biology permits, though I will not pressure you on that matter. He paused. And I would expect you to never, under any circumstances, apologize for being intelligent. I find that habit tedious. And what could I expect from you? Protection, autonomy, an allowance that is yours to manage without oversight, the freedom to pursue whatever intellectual interests engage you, my absence when you prefer it, my company when you do not, and... His smile became something sharper, more dangerous. The considerable satisfaction of watching everyone who has dismissed you realize their mistake. It was, I realized, a form of revenge. Not the hot, immediate kind that burned and destroyed. The cold, patient kind that shifted entire landscapes while everyone else slept. My mother would have to acknowledge me as a duchess. My sister would have to reconcile herself to my superior position. Every person who had looked through me as if I were window glass would have to see me clearly. And all I had to do was say yes to a man I barely knew, who seemed to value the exact qualities everyone else had taught me to hide. Your Grace, I said slowly, I am currently pouring tea for my sister's wedding guests while wearing an apron that smells of lye and my mother's disappointment. If I were to accept your proposal, what precisely would happen next? His smile widened. We would go upstairs, together. We would interrupt the ceremony at the most dramatically appropriate moment. I would announce our immediate engagement in front of every gossip and social climber in the county. Your mother would be unable to object without creating a scandal worse than the one she thinks she's avoiding. And then, he extended his hand toward me. You would remove that apron, put on something that befits a future duchess, and never serve anyone's tea again unless you chose to do so. I looked at his hand, steady and certain in the pale afternoon light. I thought about my father, who had taught me chess and encouraged my reading and told me once, shortly before he died, that I had the kind of mind that built empires. I thought about the apron in my hands and all the years of small dismissals that had led to this moment. I thought about my sister upstairs, being dressed and praised and celebrated, who had never once asked if I was happy. I set down the apron on the mahogany sideboard, next to my grandmother's china. I accept your proposal, Your Grace. Rothwell, he said, taking my hand. You should call me Rothwell. We are, after all, about to cause an extraordinary scene. We climbed the stairs together, his hand warm and solid around mine. I could hear the ceremony beginning in the drawing room, could hear the vicar's sonorous voice beginning the traditional words. My heart was beating so hard I thought it might crack my ribs, but my steps were steady. Rothwell matched my pace, his limp barely noticeable as we moved through the hallway where I had stood alone that morning. The drawing room doors were open. I could see the assembled guests, arranged in perfect rows of silk and superficial goodwill. I could see Lord Ashworth at the front, looking pleased and rather dim. I could see Lucinda, radiant in lace and orange blossoms, her golden hair catching the light exactly as everyone knew it would. I could see my mother, standing near the front, her face composed in an expression of maternal satisfaction. Rothwell and I stepped through the doorway together. The vicar faltered mid-sentence. Heads turned like flowers following sun. I watched my mother's expression shift from satisfaction to confusion, to something approaching horror as she recognized what was about to happen. Rothwell's hand tightened fractionally around mine, a small reassurance, and then he spoke into the sudden crystalline silence. "Forgive the interruption. I have an announcement that cannot wait." His voice carried effortlessly, trained by years of addressing Parliament. "Miss Eleanor Ashworth has just done me the extraordinary honor of accepting my proposal of marriage. We will be wed within the month." The silence that followed was profound and delicious. I saw shock ripple through the assembled crowd like wind through wheat. I saw Mrs. Pemberton's mouth fall open. I saw Mr. Thornwood's eyes widen. I saw my sister's face drain of color, then flush pink, then settle into something between disbelief and fury. But it was my mother's expression that I catalogued most carefully. Shock, then calculation, then a desperate attempt at composure as she realized that objecting to a duke would be social suicide. But accepting the announcement meant acknowledging that her invisible daughter had just secured a match far superior to her golden one. She managed finally to say, "Your Grace, this is most unexpected." "Life's greatest pleasures often are." Rothwell inclined his head toward Lucinda with perfect courtesy. "Miss Lucinda, Lord Ashworth, please accept my apologies for the disruption and my warmest wishes for your happiness. I'm certain you understand that when one encounters perfection, one must act immediately." He looked at me when he said it, not at my sister. We left the ceremony before anyone could formulate a proper response. Rothwell guided me back down the stairs, through the hall, into the south parlor, where my grandmother's tea service still waited, now cooling and forgotten. He closed the door behind us, and we stood for a moment in the sudden quiet, the noise of disrupted wedding muted by wood and distance. "That went well," he said calmly. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. The sound emerged from some deep place I had locked away years ago, loud and genuine and entirely inappropriate. I laughed until tears blurred my vision, until my stomach hurt, until all the careful composure I had maintained for so long cracked open and let something true escape. When I finally stopped, Rothwell was watching me with an expression of profound satisfaction. "There," he said. "That's better. You should laugh like that more often." "I don't think duchesses are supposed to laugh like that." "Then we shall have to revise the expectations of duchesses." He moved to the sideboard, poured fresh tea into 2 cups, and handed one to me. "We have approximately 5 minutes before your mother recovers her composure and comes looking for us. I suggest we use that time to discuss practical matters." "Such as?" "Such as the fact that I meant every word I said upstairs. I need a wife who can think. You need an escape from a family that does not value you. This is not a love match. It is a partnership based on mutual advantage, and I hope eventual respect." He paused. "I will not lie to you, Eleanor. I will not diminish you. I will not expect you to be anything other than precisely what you are. In return, I ask the same honesty from you." I sipped my tea, tasting bergamot and possibility. What if I'm terrible at being a duchess? "Then you'll learn. You're intelligent? You'll adapt." He smiled slightly. "Besides, I suspect you'll be considerably better at it than most people who inherit the position by birth. You've already demonstrated the essential skill." "Which is?" "Recognizing when to overturn the table." The door burst open. My mother stood in the doorway, her face flushed, her carefully arranged hair slightly disarrayed. Behind her I could see curious guests clustering, trying to peer into the room. "Eleanor," she said, her voice brittle with forced calm. "I must speak with you, privately." "I think not," Rothwell said pleasantly. "Miss Ashworth and I have matters to discuss. Perhaps after the wedding." He paused delicately. "The other wedding. You might call on us at Rothwell House. We'll be happy to receive you then." My mother's eyes went wide. "You cannot possibly expect me to allow this. Eleanor is my daughter. She is not of age." "She is 24, Rothwell interrupted gently. "Quite of age, and unless I am mistaken about English law, perfectly capable of making her own decisions regarding marriage." He looked at me. "Unless you have changed your mind?" I looked at my mother's face, at the desperation there, the belated recognition of value. I looked at the guests behind her, already cataloging the scandal for future gossip. I looked at the tea service on the sideboard, at the apron I had discarded, at the room where I had been invisible. "I have not changed my mind," I said clearly. "I am going to marry the Duke of Rothwell. Within the month, as he said." My mother opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You ungrateful—" "Careful," Rothwell said, and his voice went cold as winter. "You are speaking about my future Duchess. I suggest you remember that." She stepped back as if he had struck her. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the apron and the dismissals, and every time she had introduced me as our other daughter, in a tone that suggested I was an afterthought or obligation. The sympathy evaporated. "Excuse us," Rothwell said, taking my elbow. "We have wedding arrangements to make." He guided me past my mother, past the gawking guests, down the hallway and out the front door into afternoon sunshine that felt like absolution. A carriage waited in the drive, magnificent, and crested with the Rothwell arms. He handed me up as if I were already something precious, then settled beside me as the driver urged the horses forward. I watched my family home recede behind us, growing smaller with each turn of the wheels, and felt nothing but relief. The month that followed was a strange suspension of normal time. Rothwell kept his word about everything. He installed me in Rothwell House, in a suite of rooms with windows facing south and shelves already filled with books he thought I might enjoy. He introduced me to his steward, his solicitor, and his housekeeper, making it clear that I was to be consulted on all estate matters. He gave me a bank account with enough money that I actually gasped when I saw the figures. "That's yours," he said calmly. "Not household money, yours. Spend it how you like. Invest it if you prefer. I don't care, as long as you stop looking like I've given you a nest of vipers." We were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony that my mother attended with a smile so forced it looked painful. Lucinda did not come. She sent a note claiming illness, but I knew the truth. She could not bear to watch me elevated above her. After a lifetime of being the visible sister, the celebrated daughter, she could not endure my triumph. I should have felt guilty about that. I did not. The wedding itself was quiet and elegant, everything Lucinda's had not been. No crowd of gossips, no elaborate displays, just Rothwell and myself, speaking vows that felt more like treaty negotiations than romance, witnessed by a handful of people who actually mattered to us. When the vicar pronounced us married, Rothwell kissed my hand instead of my lips. "Welcome to your new life, Eleanor," he said quietly. "I hope it proves more interesting than the old one." It did. God help me, it did. I discovered, in the months that followed, that I had a talent for estate management. The account books that had confused Rothwell made perfect sense to me. The tenant disputes that he found tedious, I resolved with what he called alarming efficiency. The London social season that he dreaded, I navigated with the strategic precision of a general deploying troops. We developed over time something that resembled friendship. He told me about his first marriage, ended by fever when he was young. I told him about my father, about chess games and conversations about philosophy. We discussed politics over breakfast and books over dinner. We argued about agricultural policy and the proper education of children. We never discussed love, because we had both learned that love was less reliable than mutual respect. We never had children. My body, it seemed, was unwilling or unable. Rothwell accepted this with the same pragmatic grace he brought to everything else. "We'll find a suitable heir," he said. "Preferably someone intelligent. I refuse to leave Rothwell House to an idiot just because they share my blood." And sometimes late at night when I sat in my study, reviewing accounts or reading by lamplight, I thought about my sister's wedding day, about the apron and the tea service and the moment when everything changed, about the choice I had made, standing in my grandmother's parlor with fury in my heart and clarity in my mind. I never regretted it. Not once. Years later, I received an invitation to Lucinda's anniversary ball. 20 years of marriage, the elegant script announced, a celebration of enduring love and devotion. I showed it to Rothwell over breakfast. "Are you going to accept?" he asked, not looking up from his newspaper. "I think I will," I said slowly. "I find I'm curious about your sister's happiness, about whether she ever realized what she had or what she missed." We attended together, dressed in the kind of quiet elegance that wealth and taste provide when they work in concert. The ballroom was magnificent, dripping with flowers and candlelight and evidence of expensive effort. Lucinda stood at the center of it all, still beautiful, her golden hair now threaded with silver, her smile as practiced as porcelain. Lord Ashworth stood beside her, looking prosperous and empty. I watched them greet their guests, watched the performance of marital harmony, and saw in Lucinda's eyes the same boredom I had seen in mine that morning 20 years ago. She saw me across the ballroom. Our eyes met, and in that moment I understood that she knew. She knew that I had escaped something she was still enduring. She knew that the beautiful cage she had chosen was still a cage. She knew that intelligence and autonomy and genuine partnership were things she would never have because she had traded them for a title and a house and the admiration of people who valued appearance over substance. I inclined my head slightly. Acknowledgement, not forgiveness, not triumph, just recognition of what we had each chosen and what those choices had cost. Then Rothwell took my arm, and we moved toward the refreshment table where someone else was serving tea. I never touched a tea service again unless I chose to. I never apologized for my intelligence. I never again allowed anyone to make me invisible. And when I died, many years later, they said at my funeral that the Duchess of Rothwell had been formidable, brilliant, and entirely herself until the end. They said Rothwell had loved her in his fashion. They said she had managed his estates with a skill that bordered on genius. They did not say I had been beautiful. They did not say I had been graceful or delicate or any of the things women of my era were supposed to be. They said I had been powerful, and they were right.